This is the most important subject for all of us to discuss. My job here today is really to cover what are unions around the country doing, and to talk about some of the successes. And I want to do that and the relationship between what the unions are doing and the successes. But I want to talk first about the 800-pound gorilla, which is in a room of trade unionists discussing this issue. Because for most trustees trying to figure out what to do with this question, they take into account two issues. They take into account their fiduciary responsibility, and they take in the moral question. What's the morality of? After all, it is burning up the planet, our house. For us as trade unionists, we have a third issue to take into account. And it's a real issue, and it's a political issue, and that's the issue of jobs. And for decades, this issue has been framed inside the trade union movement. Basically, can we have either a clean environment or jobs, but we can't have both? And this issue continues right up to this moment to be a very bitter political question. It came up very seriously in the labor movement around the XL pipeline, and it is now a bitter, nasty issue within the labor movement around the issue of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Within just the last couple of weeks, unions that have been supporting stopping the pipeline have been attacked by basically the building trades in very open, very serious language, with threats to leave the AFL-CIO and so forth. So we have a third issue, the issue of jobs, supposedly versus a clean environment. What I want to talk about now is an organization, the Labor Network for Sustainability. That's who I'm representing here today, and describe what's going on with that. And what DC 37 is doing, what the city pension funds are trying to do, what the unions in New York are trying to do, is really part of a much larger movement here in this country and globally. The labor LNS was formed in 2009 to try to provide some research to unions, some answers to unions about the issue of climate change. And I have to tell you, it's really a good thing for those of you in this room. If you want to know how to deal with the issue of jobs and the fundamental issue of just transition from a carbon-based economy to one that's less or not carbon-based, the issue of just transition, LNS and its website and the research it's done is one-stop shopping for you. It's really a very good resource. The most recent study that LNS has done was issued in the spring of this year. It's called Jobs, Justice, and Sustainability, a plan for jobs in a safe economy. And it basically was commissioned by LNS, who, with 350.org, by the way, and they asked Synapse, an economic research group, to answer the following question. If the United States were to succeed in meeting the Paris goals, meaning 80% reduction of use of carbon by the year 2050, what would be the cost to consumers, and what would it mean for jobs for American workers? That's the study. And obviously what it found is that, in fact, we'd have 500,000 more jobs. They could be better paid. The cost to the consumers is either neutral or negative. And it's based on studies done in 4 states, Illinois, Connecticut, Eastern Kentucky, and Maryland. Actual plans that have been put together in those states and the projected results of those. So it's a very good study. Labor Network for Sustainability is, I think, the best source for addressing the key concept that has to be in the front of all the work on climate change in the trade union movement, which is the concept of just transition. That the burden can't be on the workers who are displaced by one economy moving into another. The concept of just transition is key to everything we do, and if it's not in the front of what we do, we will not build a consensus within the labor movement. You heard from John that of the 5 funds in New York, 2 actually voted not to divest from, proceed down the path of divesting in carbon stocks. So now let me talk more about what's going on in the rest of the labor movement. A year ago, last fall, Labor Network decided that it needed a more activist arm. It didn't want to just keep doing research. And so last January, we held what we call a convergence of union activists from around the country. In Washington, we had 75 people come from unions all over the country, state feds, international unions, presidents of unions, Central Labor Council presidents, activists from various unions. And we formed the Convergence for Climate Change. And we now have various programs. We're developing educational materials for unions to use, to resolutions, model resolutions. This is all on our website, the LNS website. And we're reaching out to various unions around the country. We're targeting unions based on the kinds of pension funds they have and doing the research on that. And we are actively involved in the Divest Invest network, which I'll talk more about in a minute. In terms of, we have joined, and I represent LNS on the Divest Invest network. Many of you, I assume, are familiar with that network. It basically coordinates Divest Invest operations, not just in this country, not just for unions, but around the world. Institutional investors, individual investors, 401ks, pension funds, sovereign funds, university funds, etc. And we are beginning to work closely with them. Let me talk first about some of the work in the unions. This is a beginning movement and a very difficult movement for the reason I outlined to begin with, because of the question of jobs and how it's been framed for so many decades within the labor movement. But we now have, there are resolutions and the beginnings of divestment studies in divestment. For example, in the AFL-CIO state feds in California, Washington, and Connecticut have passed resolutions. The California Teachers Union has passed a resolution to divest. Central Labor Councils, for example, in San Diego and Alameda County, have voted to divest their funds. SEIU has set up a whole international union program about climate change, including looking into divestment. There are examples, here in New York, the Congress, right, that was brought up earlier here. In Montgomery County in Maryland, a county of 1.2 million people, the union there, which the UFCW represents the public workers, or most of them in that county, has voted to divest from all the pension funds. And last week, a member of the county council introduced the resolutions to get the council to say, yes, let's divest for all the pension funds for all these employees in this county. So this is beginning. There is a movement beginning within the labor movement to take this on, despite the very serious difficulties we face, as I said, in addition to fiduciary and moral questions. Around the world, John asked me to talk about some of the other movements that are going on. Obviously, Judy referred to, or someone did, there are over 600 institutions now that have divested $3.4 trillion out of fossil fuels. That's no small amount. And that is growing, and it's growing in this country. And the most recent example we have of it in this country, not unions, but various religious groups have started this, and most recently various Catholic organizations have started divesting. Some universities have actually, there are movements, by the way, of students in over 200 campuses to divest. And some of them have already started divesting, including some of the Jesuit institutions, Georgetown, the University of Dayton, my own alma mater, Holy Cross, actually taking steps to divest. So, and what I want to call attention to, because sometimes I think in the labor movement we get so defensive about this kind of work, is that if you read the documents of these recent Catholic institutions that are divesting, they all start out by referring to the Pope's encyclical, Laudate Si. And they all talk about the motivating reason that they're divesting is the moral reason of burning this planet we live on. And then they get to, and it was interesting, I thought, the list of what it really means to be a fiduciary. I was on the 1199 pension fund for many years. I was the chair of the investment committee on the 1199 pension fund. And I can remember trying to get the trustees of coming from the big hospitals in this city to change our investment just to invest in subsidized housing in this city. And we couldn't get them to do it. That's how difficult this is. But that involves such a narrow concept of what your fiduciary responsibility is. It is a much broader concept of what you have a responsibility as a fiduciary. And these Catholic institutions that are divesting start out, and what they talk about is their moral responsibility for life on this planet. And I say that because even myself, I have to remind myself to start out not being so apologetic about this. Oh, it'll be safe. Oh, we can do it in 3 to 5 years. Oh, we can make the same or more money, etc. And all these plans, by the way, are the Divest Invest Network has models for all of this. They're gathering research. They're showing that funds that divest make the same or more return. All this work is being done, and I think. Even speaking for myself, because I was a trustee, I think we're too cautious about this. We have to start out in the labor movement talking about the morality of why we have to divest and reinvest. Not be so cautious, not be so afraid, because we do have a broader concept involved in responsibility for these funds. So I want to end with an experience I had 2 weeks ago. We were invited, LNS was invited to speak at the Central Maryland annual big labor movement dinner, where all the locals from all over Central Maryland come, and they have honoring various things. The new senator was there, new Congress people were there. And we were invited to speak at it, and we rarely get a chance to address groups like this. This is Central Maryland, so this is a group of very conservative people in the middle of that state. And so I went, I spoke, and afterwards, based on conversations I had with people afterwards and on email dialogue I'm having with people who were there afterwards since then, I learned 2 things. First of all, honestly, there were about 180 people in the room. I asked 2 questions, because I start out by saying, you know, I'm a trade unionist. I haven't done this work my life. But I read a book that changed my life. I said, how many of you have heard of Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything? Not a single hand in the room went up. 180 trade unionists. Later on, when I was running through LNS and what we do, talking about just transition, I said, so how many of you heard of the phrase just transition? 5 or 6 hands in the room went up. And then I've had these conversations afterwards with people and online. So the first thing I learned is our members have never had a single 5 or 15-minute factual conversation about what climate change really means. We make so many assumptions about what people are familiar with and what they're not. They may have heard about it on whatever talk radio, or they may see a headline or whatever. Not that they had not engaged in a 15-minute intelligent conversation about the most important thing in our lives ever. And second, because this is a union group and I'm a trade unionist, they listen to me. So that the second thing I learned is if union people will take the initiative and raise this issue and talk about it, they are very interested, and they really want to learn about it, and they want to have an exchange, and they certainly want to know what they can do about it and what they can do about it as a union member in their union. So I say that because I think, in line with some of the other things I've already said, I think we are too defensive, I think we're too apologetic, I think we're too fearful, I think we have to go out there, and that's what LNS and through the convergence what we're trying to do now, and be much more aggressive. Learn how to talk about this, have very specific things, asking people what they can do, and go out and really address this issue with union members. We are the only major institution in this country that is not yet moving on this issue, the labor movement. And we can't be worried about those unions who will never come along, and go and address those unions who will, and I think be much more aggressive about this. And I think we can begin to play and divest and invest in our pension funds a leading role on this issue in the country. So,
thank you, Bob.